Felix Gomez had grown somewhat used to his situation. The violence of his abduction, the loss of control, and the feeling of impending doom all competed for his attention. But he'd managed to adjust. The first night had been the worst, when he'd been literally catatonic in fear. But that had steadily eroded as he realized that they meant to keep him for his worth and had no inclination to torture him for amusement. The night before, he'd even managed to fall asleep. He'd had nightmares, but all in all, he was holding up better than the others who were with him. A man of about 50 and a boy not much older than him. Both seemed on the verge of a nervous breakdown, their faces reflecting a hollow shell devoid of hope. Perhaps it was because of their respective timelines. The old man had told him he'd been here for over a week, and the younger one was running up against a week and a half. Felix knew the average time for successful negotiation and repatriation was 5 to 7 days. After that, the kidnappers either felt they were being jerked around, or that the families simply couldn't come up with the money, with the victim usually found dead alongside a dusty road, bound and blindfolded with packing tape. Another antiterrorist to add to the statistics. Both of the men with him were running out of time and knew it. Or perhaps it was the fact that he hadn't been abused, like the two other captives. The older one's face was swollen, with a bloodshot purple-black eye, and he was missing his index finger on one hand, the stump covered in dirty cloth. A proof of life sent to someone to communicate that Los Cetes meant business. The younger one had a bandage on his upper arm that was mottled red, fresh blood seeping from the wound over the crust of the old. Felix had no idea what that represented, but nothing of the sort had happened to him. Maybe if he'd been treated to constant abuse, he'd be as mentally crushed as they were. It might also have been his faith in his father. He knew Arturo Gomez would move heaven and earth to free him, and had the power and money to do so. He was sure they were tracking him right now because he had an ace up his sleeve. Well, underneath his sleeve, that is. He unconsciously rubbed his left triceps where his ace was buried. Initially, he was petrified the men would undress him when he was placed in the basement. But all they'd done was take anything that could have been of value for escape, such as his shoes and cell phone, leaving everything else as he wore it. Leaving his belt, which was much, much more valuable for escape than his cell phone. Had he been able to call, he had no idea what he would have said to get them to his location, but his belt was sending that out constantly. He wondered if his father was even now planning his rescue. The lights flashed on, and his two roommates scurried to their designated eye bolts, the older one silently weeping. Felix did the same, as the enforcer Felix had taken to calling El Barbudo, or the bearded one, came down the stairs. In one hand he held a fillet knife, and the other was a machete. He ignored the other two blubbering captives and came straight for Felix, throwing a pair of handcuffs at his feet. Felix manacled himself to the eye bolt. His arms drawn out before him, his hands locked, El Barbudo gave him a choice. Tell which arm held the anti-kidnapping chip, or have them both cut off with a machete. Felix felt his world collapse, the reason for the other boy's upper arm wound becoming crystal clear. How did they know? How did they know? He feigned innocence, and El Barbudo raised the machete, lightly touching the upper bicep of his right arm. Manacled to the eye bolt, his arm in perfect position for getting hacked off at the shoulder, Felix whispered the answer. 10 seconds later, he was screaming. A minute passed, and the man was holding the little device in his hand, covered in a coating of bodily fluid. He dropped